All right. Well, we'll jump in here. We've got some folks on. We're streaming live on Facebook as we push this out as well. So thank you for joining us. Good afternoon, and my name is Ian Campbell. I'm the CEO of Mission Suite, and I'm excited to be joined today by Dean Isaacs, who's the founder and CEO of Vantage Group. Now, before we jump in, I want to address a couple of housekeeping items. We will be taking questions throughout the session today, and we'll open up to Q&A here at the end. Excuse me, if you do have any questions, please use that Q&A feature in Zoom to make sure that we can address any of those questions as they come up. Now, Dean is a serial entrepreneur with over 20 years of hands-on business growth, sales, and marketing experience. He works with business-to-business companies across the U.S. that range from startups to the Fortune 500. His passion is helping small and mid-sized businesses achieve their growth goals by developing and implementing high-impact sales, marketing, and growth strategies. I've been fortunate to know Dean for almost 10 years now, and I've gotten to see his work from some of the clients we've shared, and I'm excited to have him here. This is the first in a series of interview-based webinars that Dean and I are going to be doing so that we can pick his brain a bit and see what we can learn from him. So, Dean, thanks so much for joining me.
Well, thanks, Ian. I appreciate you inviting me today. I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So first things first, tell us a little bit about yourself, the work that you've been doing, and how you got to where you are now. You can go ahead and start wherever you want to start.
Awesome. Thanks. Yeah, well, as you well know, but the folks on the call may pick up, I'm not from Denver originally. I'm from London, England. Been in the States for about 30 years now. So my accent will come and go probably as we have our conversation today. But nonetheless, that's where I'm from. I've owned businesses over the last 20 years, mostly in professional services, consulting type businesses, marketed and sold to businesses up and down the food chain, as you mentioned, from the smallest to the largest enterprises. So my passion really, as you mentioned also, is helping businesses grow. And we all know that the lifeblood of businesses is revenue, profitable revenue that flows into the organization in a sort of consistent, predictable manner. So that's really what we focus on at Vantage Group, is helping business owners figure out that process, that strategy, and then working with them to implement those tactics to generate the results that they need. And so mostly B2B businesses are our clients, but we work with the B2C companies as well. And their clients are across every spectrum and every industry across the country too. So it's a lot of fun.
Excellent. Very nice. Very nice. So you and I have spoken at length in the past about this concept called the buyer's journey. It seems like this is a pretty familiar concept to a lot of marketers, but may not be for business owners who don't have much experience in marketing. Can you tell us a little bit more about this concept of the buyer's journey?
Yeah, so the buyer's journey, as you said, it's really something that mostly marketers think about. Sometimes sales professionals aren't thinking about it. And I find that very often small business owners really don't even know it exists, right? It's a different concept. The small business owner that's focused on just getting their business running, getting some cash in the door, managing employees, all of the things that business owners have to do. But really undertaking some time to understand what the buyer's journey is all about, and then how to use that information in your business can have a massive impact, not just on generating revenue, but in how you develop your products and services, how you price, how you retain customers long-term as well. So really the buyer's journey, the way I think about the buyer's journey is it's when a prospect, a business, identifies an issue in their business that's big enough that they want to spend some time and money on trying to solve. That's where the buyer's journey begins. It's not the seller's journey, right? It's not where we engage with that prospect. It's where they start thinking about buying stuff. So the buyer's journey begins there, and then it really goes through every phase of that process to the point where they make a decision to buy or not to buy, and then who they buy from. So it's once they identify the business problem they want to solve, how do they think about and categorize that problem, right? Is it something where they can go out and buy software for? Is it something where they need services? Is it something they can bring in-house? How do they sort of categorize and qualify what the business problem is? Next stage, typically in the buyer's journey, is how do they find that resource, right? Are they going to just Google, how do I such and such? Or do they ask their friendly CPA for a referral? Or where do they go find resources to help solve that problem? Typically, the next step in the buyer's journey is how do they start to evaluate solutions and providers or software or whatever it might be. And then the third is the full step would be then how are they going to make a buying decision, right? What are they going to weigh up? Is price the driving factor? Is relationship, credibility, expertise in our industry? What do they look at to make buying decisions? And then finally, are they going to make a buying decision? Is this a go or a no-go? So there's lots of steps in the buyer's journey, but it's not about how we want to market and sell. It's about how they want to discover and buy. It's an empathetic approach to this marketing and sales stuff. So that's generally what the buyer's journey looks like. And as you can imagine, it's different for every business and every industry, every size of business as well.
Mm-hmm. So if I'm hearing you right, so you're saying that the buyer's journey, I mean, when we're thinking about selling through the buyer's journey, rather, we're starting long before they even realize that necessarily realize that they need our services, or
Absolutely.
that we might be the ones that, so we might be the ones to do that. And I'm assuming most people kind of start kind of in that and halfway into that journey that you just described. So how do you, like, with so the clients that you're working with, people like that, how do you get to kind of pull people back to where they actually first start thinking in their mind about how to go about that?
Yeah, it's funny you say that because there's two pieces to that. The one is Harvard Business Review did a study not too long ago, and they analyzed buyers of business services. And what they realized was that these buyers are about 60%, and actually it may be more like 70, 75% now, of the way through their buying decision before they ever wanted to engage with a salesperson. Think about that. As a sales guy, I don't get to talk to somebody until they're 3/4 of the way through their process. That's kind of scary, right? That puts a lot of the emphasis and the power into the buyer, and we don't have as much influence as we did before. So one way to move earlier in the buyer's journey is when we put a marketing hat on and we want to be perceived in the marketplace as an expert in solving that particular issue that buyer is trying to go through, being visible, being found, right? Being findable. If somebody searches for the thing that you do, are you findable on the web, right? So that as these buyers are early in the decision-making process and they start looking for solutions, you show up as someone that is an expert and adds value to that marketplace.
Yeah. So when you say that as salespeople, we don't have the same influence as we did before, what do you mean by that?
Well, salespeople tend to be sort of show up and throw up, right? We get in front of that desired buyer. We think they're ready to buy our stuff, and we just show up and we talk about all of the features that we have, all of the cool stuff that we can do. And quite honestly, if you've done a good job with your marketing, the buyer already knows that stuff, because that's the stuff they're looking for before they want to engage with a salesperson. So the old bag of tricks that salespeople used to have, they don't have anymore. They've been disarmed. And so we'll talk about sales probably in another upcoming webinar, but the power now has shifted to this sort of early top of the funnel marketing engagement content where we're describing the value. We're helping business owners think about solving these problems before they ever actually physically talk to one of our salespeople.
Right. So Seth Godin is quoted as saying, and I'm probably going to butcher this, but something to the effect of content marketing is the only kind of marketing that there is left. Would you say that there's some accuracy to that?
Yeah, for sure, right? Because if you're not providing content, what are you doing?
Right.
What information you're just pushing somebody into a place they don't want to be. And when we push back. Mm-hmm. So yeah, it has to be content. And there are so many variations of what content means, right? It could be as simply as emailing a PDF. It could be a landing page on your website. It could be a video. It could be this kind of thing, right? Webinars. So I think we have to sort of narrow the world of content and align that, the message that the content is portraying and the format and the channel you communicate it through to where the buyer is in their buyer's journey, right? If we can have content about other features of our software, but if it's too early in the buyer's journey, the buyer's not going to resonate with that.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, excellent. So now let's talk a little bit about this idea of the ideal client, right? Because from everything that you're telling me, it sounds like, the first thing that you've got to do in order to figure out what kind of content you're creating, pretty much do anything else, is that you've got to create that ideal client profile.
For sure.
And we titled this session, finding the bullseye, because it's a metaphor to which I think most people will probably be able to relate. But why, like, kind of, can you give me some kind of in-depth info as to why business owners should really be taking the time to find that bullseye and really figure out who their actual ideal client is?
Yeah, for sure. So you're a business owner, right? And so you've worked with lots of different types of clients. Um, have you ever worked with a client that you met them, you connected with them, they just got what you did immediately? They just got it. They
Mm-hmm.
didn't argue about price. They wanted to know more. They were very responsive. They bought from you. And when they bought from you, they saw the value in what you do. And then they stuck around a long time. And then they told all their friends. You ever had a client like that?
They
Right.
seem to be few and far between, but
Right.
yeah, they're out there,
Right,
right?
exactly. So do you want more of those?
Yeah.
Well, that's your ideal client, right? That's sort of like the on the ground experience level. That's your ideal client. You want to find more of those. So how do you find more of those? Well, you go through the process of developing a profile that matches that kind of buyer, that kind of company. And the ICP, ideal client profile, is broken into a few different sections. It's sort of like the definition of the company, and then the individuals that will actually buy from your work with. So that's one reason, is you want customers that buy more, spend more, stay around longer, and refer all their friends, right? That's ideal. That's one reason. Another reason to define this profile is it gets you really focused on all of your sales and marketing activities. All right, we've all ran down that rabbit trail of chasing a customer that we thought was going to be awesome. And if we landed them, we regret landing them, right? We've had those, or you just don't ever get them, right? They just give you the put off after put off. So you get to avoid all of that stuff and really focus all of your marketing, your messaging, the channels, and then your sales process to those people so that you close more quickly. And I would say another reason is you get to think about the services you're delivering, and are they meeting the needs of that ideal client profile? Right? Sometimes we have to tweak and pivot what we do, how we price and package, how we retain. All of those things are aligned with adding the most value possible to your ideal client. So those are just some things that come to mind.
So it sounds like there's kind of three main kind of categories that fall under that, if I'm understanding you correctly. First of all, you get to make more money off of them, right? For
Yep.
the reason that you just mentioned.
Yep.
Second of all, you're actually saving money on your sales and marketing activities. Is that a big part of it too?
Sure. Yep.
And then finally, your kind of internal processes, things like that. So is that, I mean, that kind of runs the gamut of business ownership, right? So
Yeah.
I mean, is so, like, if I were to, I mean, is the ideal client profile, like knowing exactly who you're reaching to, kind of the overarching answer to the business woes here?
I think in small business, especially, it really is, right? When we try and be all things to all people, we become less valuable to the people that we serve, right? You mentioned Seth Godin. I love Seth. Seth says, in terms of marketing, focus on your smallest viable market, right? So you could take a sector. So let's say I sell my stuff to CPA firms.
Mhm.
Well, that's not your ideal client market or your ideal client profile. That's just a vertical. That's just an industry. You got to go way beyond just saying CPA services. And what I find is the business owners tend to get a little bit scared, right? When I talk about smallest viable market, they think smaller market share opportunity. I can't grow my business to this $1 million business. Well, the truth of the story is it's quite the opposite. Because if you focus on that smallest viable market and you become a recognized expert in their industry, people then come to you far more easily, and you actually get to maximize your market share in that vertical or in that space. And the other thing is, Ian, you can have more than one ICP, right? You can have more than one ideal client profile. I suggest start with one, get that nailed, right? Get really good at that. But you can grow around that too.
Sure, sure. So is this something that you look at from, like you mentioned, the industries, right? Accounting firms is just a part of it, and then there's all these features, and we're going to get into that here in a minute. But should we be thinking psychographically as well as demographically?
Yeah, no, great question. Absolutely. So the demographics are easy, right? So we'll just make one up on the fly here. So we work with accounting firms that have between 1 and 3 partners based in Denver, Colorado, that focus on tax and tax preparation.
Mhm.
Right. That's a sort of like a demographic for a business, right? But then to go to that sort of psychographic level, that's really the individuals that are making buying decisions. So we may say that we want to work with millennial-owned CPA firms that focus on technology companies or early stage companies, right? So there's a little bit of demographic and there's a little bit of a psychographic, because you and I both know selling to baby boomers is very different to selling to millennials.
Sure.
They buy in a very different way. They look for products and services in a very different way. So our marketing is affected, and the languaging that we use and the value that we talk about can be completely different. So that psychographic piece is really important, because ultimately people buy from people.
Right, right. So kind of going back for a second to the comment that you made about salespeople not having the same influence that they did, and kind of pulling it back here, because because I remember, just time and time again we hear all about how marketing has changed, sales has changed, what have you, right? And so I've heard a number of stories about how salespeople used to be the place where business owners and buyers would get all their information.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And that was their content marketing, right? I mean, they would come stacked with all their marketing slicks and whatnot. And then that was how buyers got their information.
Yep.
So is there still a place for that, or should we really be focusing on moving into this new kind of methodology of selling where we have to realize that the journey's going to be very different?
Yeah. It's I think the latter, right? We have to really embrace the fact that how do people find and evaluate the stuff that they buy?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
They go to Google, they search stuff, right? What I find is one of the processes that I use when I work with my clients is I interview their clients, right? The people they work with. And I always ask the question, how did you find them? How did you find this company? And I typically get, especially in the small professional services space, I typically get two responses. Somebody referred me to them, or I Googled them. I searched for something and I happened to find them. So if we're not focusing on reputation and putting content out into the world that attracts our ideal client, then we're behind the curve with 100%. And I think the other thing is we have to think about sales and marketing as a combined effort versus two separate things. Marketing's lead gen, it throws it over the fence to sales, and sales goes sells. It doesn't work like that anymore. It's really a combined effort. So even if we've done a really good job up front with marketing and lead gen and all this initial kind of content, and then the prospect waves their hand and says, yep, I'd like to talk to a salesperson. The reality is that salesperson is going to need more content, right? They're going to need marketing support to move that deal across the finish line. So it has to be this collaborative, combined approach the whole way down the journey.
Yeah. So are we seeing an end to this epic struggle between sales and marketing, where they're where VPs of sales and marketing have to act like parents, keeping warring children apart?
Yeah, I wish. I don't think so. I think organizations that are large enough to have like a chief revenue officer or a chief growth officer, there's somebody that is in charge of the whole revenue cycle, right? Marketing, sales, and customer success and retention. We find friction is coming, sort of like getting better there.
Yeah.
But in the smaller businesses, they don't have that, right? They have a business owner and somebody leading marketing and somebody leading sales. Right. And so I think there's always going to be that friction. And that's why the executives, the owners, the business, the CEOs, and those types of individuals have to understand that we have to get these things aligned. Because as soon as you have two people doing two different things, there's going to be friction. And if marketing is measured on success, say, on clicks on the website or leads that are unqualified, and sales is told to go sell more stuff, they're going to go sell more stuff to make their comp plan. And they're not even going to worry about the leads that marketing may or may not be generating and if they're good or not. So that the way we set up sales and marketing, the way we hold them accountable for their results and how we compensate them actually increases that friction. And I think there's a lot that needs to change there too.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So how do you go about identifying that ideal client, right? So, I mean, are there any, specific exercises that you take your clients through that just kind of give me some rundown on how you go about identifying that ideal client for yourself, for your clients, et cetera?
Yeah, absolutely. So there are a couple of different ways to go about it. And I think it depends on, the client themselves. If it's a really early stage startup company that doesn't have a track record of bringing in clients and revenue success, and they've kind of started to figure themselves out, our approach is a little bit different. If it's a real small, like a solopreneur that's just trying to put their services out into the world, it's a little different. But let's start with the third scenario, which is a company that's been around, they've got customers, they've got revenue, they've got a little bit of a track record, they've got something to build on. So we'll start there. So the best place to start the analysis process is looking at your current customers, right? As I mentioned, that one, or hopefully more than one, ideal customer that buys from you, loves you, tells all their friends. What makes that customer unique? I know that other customers are similar to that in your group of clients that you work with. You can certainly start with the easy stuff like what industry are they in, what type of business, what services or products do they provide, where are they at in sort of like their business growth and maturity stage, how did they come to you, how did they find you, so you can sort of qualify around that, but that may or may not help, right? That'll give you a little bit of direction, but it won't necessarily give you the whole picture. So I would say start there. And in that process, speak to your customers, right? Don't just sit in the conference room saying, well, we think we know all about Ian and his business and why he bought from us and what he's going to do. You don't, right? The reality is we don't know as much about our customers as we think we do. So spend the time interviewing your customers. Ask them the questions like, how did you find us? Even if you think you know, qualify that, confirm that. Why did you buy from us? What information were you looking for during your decision-making process that you were able to get from us? And what information did you not get from us? What questions were never really answered? Did you understand what the experience would be like working with us? Just dig into that stuff and ask a whole bunch of your customers those questions, and it will start to flush out some of those details that you need to be able to align with, both on the demographic and the psychographic perspective of an ICP. So that's one place to start. I would also say, regardless of where you're at in your business, take a step back and look at how the world has changed in the last 90 days, right? But beyond that, and where are there opportunities and needs in the marketplace that have either been amplified or maybe gone away, because your ideal client from 6 months ago may be not your ideal client 6 months from now, given where we're at in this economic cycle too. So you have to sort of take a step back and look at sort of the macro world as well, and think about who can gain the most value from the things that you do, right? That's the perspective. It's not about who can we sell our stuff to the most. It's the opposite. It's the empathetic approach. Who can gain the most value? And again, start from top down. If it's industry or sector, start there. Think in terms of size or where they're at in their business cycle. Think about the people in the organization. Another layer could be, who do your clients work with, right? So we mentioned the CPA firm earlier. So CPA firms that work with tech startups, right? That's one step away from you, but it can make a huge difference in who you target around your ICP as well. So I think that's a good place to start.
Okay, interesting. So, and I mean, to that point, thinking about who people are working with, it seems like that would be a good, again, kind of bridging that gap between sales and marketing. You can kind of start CPA firms that work with tech startups. I mean, that seems like you could do some marketing inside of those organizations that focus on tech startups, because CPAs are probably going to be there too, right?
You got it, right?
Yeah,
you're
right.
You're at the watering hole. Birds of a feather flock together, right? So you're right in that space.
Right,
Yeah.
right. Very nice. So now, what about a brand new business? What about somebody that's just getting started? I mean, a solo entrepreneur, somebody who's just hanging their own shingle, maybe maybe spinning up a new division of a company that company's been around for a while, but they're tasked with starting something brand new. I mean, what would you tell them? Like, what are some exercises that you take them through?
Yeah, so that's really good. And this is a fun one because it really opens up the options, right? You don't have to think, well, we're already doing this thing. We kind of know. No, you can do whatever the heck you want, which is pretty cool. So I would say, a lot of the early stage companies, they think about mission statement and value statement and all of this purpose and all that stuff, which is great. But at the end of the day, the people that will potentially buy from you don't really care.
Right.
some do really care about buying from a mission-driven or a purpose-driven company. And that can be a part of your ideal client profile, right? It's targeting those types of individuals. But we've all been through the exercise of, developing our elevator pitch, right? You go to a networking event and you're ready to say who you are and what you do and how you do it. You're ready for that. Well, that doesn't necessarily talk about the value that you bring. So you're like, oh, I need to develop my value proposition, which talks about sort of like that transformation, the value that you bring. And then you realize, you know what makes me different? Well, I need to create my unique selling proposition, right? And so you create that thing, which talks about what makes you different. And none of that necessarily makes a lot of sense to the people you're talking to, because it's very fragmented. So I ran across another approach by a guy named Mel Abrams, and you can just Google Mel, and the process that he put together is a thing called the Value Articulator statement. So it sounds kind of complex, but the reality is it combines elevator pitch, value prop, and unique selling proposition in a way that helps you really refine what do I do, who do I do it for, what are the results that they can expect, and what makes me different. And if you put all those together, all of a sudden you've got the framework for your ICP, your ideal client profile, and the foundation for your messaging, which is really the next piece of the process. We break it down into 5 steps. The first is a kind of an I help statement. So who do you work with? Who do you help? Who do you support? And of course, all of these need to be very specific. So we'll continue down the CPA path because we use that as an example, if that's cool. So I help early stage CPA firms that work with tech startups, right? So that's very specific. And then what do you do? So I help them with, we'll just make something up here. I help them with developing their marketing and sales strategy to attract the most profitable clients possible, right? So that's what I do. And then the next step is the so that statement, so that they can grow their business and drive profitability to the bottom line. Just making stuff up here. So those are the 3 steps. I help, what do we do so that they can benefit? And then the last 2 pieces are the differentiation. So unlike other marketing agencies, we work with both sales and marketing strategy and implementation to ensure results, right? So that's the next step. And then the final piece is the differentiation. And we do this differently because, or how, we do this face-to-face, live with our clients, and it's not a saran wrap cookie cutter approach. So those 5 steps, the I help, who you work with, the what do you do, what they'll expect, the differentiation, unlike others, and then finally, how do you deliver differently? So that sounds very complicated, but it's actually just 5 simple statements that will really help you focus on who you want to work with, what you do, what you deliver, the value you deliver, and the results that they can expect. So if you just Google value articulator statement, you can find the template online. I'm happy to send it out to anybody that's interested. But going through that exercise really helps us focus in on the ideal client and the value that we bring. It aligns those 2.
Right. Very nice. Interesting. So that's the value articulator statement, you said, right? Okay, excellent. It's inarticulate, trying to way to say it, for me to say it anyway. Easy for me to say it, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, and it combines all those things. And I think for a startup, an early stage company, it puts all of these things that are floating around in an entrepreneur's head about how do we talk about what we do and what's the value we bring, all in alignment with the needs of your client, right? Because at the end of the day, that's what matters. It's not about what we think, it's about what they think. Right. So if you sort of go through that exercise of thinking through the who I help first, it sort of sets the framework for the rest of that statement.
So it's an interesting point. So while you were talking, kind of, I had the idea that everything good has something, everything that we pursue has something that we avoid associated with it, right? So do you have like an anti-client profile too? Like, these are the people that I don't work with, that I will draw a line in the sand and say, no way no matter how much extra I charge them, they're not worth my time, kind of thing? Do you recommend that as well, or does it, is it really just focus on the ones that you want to be working with, and then just kind of forget the rest?
That's a great question, because I think it comes down to discipline, right? So you start with this focus, and we're going after these customers, and we know the value we bring, and we know how we're going to talk about it. And then this shiny object comes along. Somebody that says, I'll spend money on your stuff. Well, then you have to have the discipline to say, do they fit into our ideal client profile? And if they don't, what are the ramifications? And most startups are driving revenue, right? They're going to go chase the shiny object. They're going to go chase the cash. And so if you do have that sort of antithesis, we won't work with, and then at least put some guardrails around it, right? So for me, one of the things that's an absolute no-go, if they fit into every piece of my ICP, all of that stuff's perfect. If they're not fun people to work with, I don't want to work with them, right? And that's very sort of like subjective to me. But if we don't click, if we don't have some rapport, then I'm not interested. I'm just not. I actually had a prospect. They were actually a client I did a small project for, and they wanted to really expand scope. And during that process of working with their team, their management team, the way the CEO communicated with his management team and how that sort of put me in a weird situation, I realized, you know what? This is just not an individual I want to work with. He says all the right stuff. He's waving the check in front of me, but he's just not an individual I want to work with. I don't think I could really have the impact and have derive the value that I would if we had that sort of like synergy. So I told him, I basically explained that to him and walked away from it, which really sucks. It hurts, right? Because you leave money on the table. But after my sort of like remorse of going through that process, reflecting back on a day or so later, I was like, you know what? As hard as that was the right decision for me and my business. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I do think you have to have those guardrails in place as well.
So when you're talking to a client that's a small business owner that's just getting started and whatnot, I mean, how do you how do you kind of really solidify the fact that walking away from this is going to be better for you in the long run? You just have to see past to see past that. I mean, because I assume that's something that probably comes up in your conversations.
It does, and it's a tough one, right? When revenue cash is king, right? So we sort of like extend the scenario out, and we sort of put that business owner in that situation a week, a month, a year from now, and try and create what we think it will be like working with that client, right? So could be an emotional, physical drag on the team if they're really high maintenance, for example. It could be someone that's always pressing on price and always wanting the discount. It could be someone that sets or has unrealistic expectations around delivery. So we talk about those things, and then we sort of put them back into the business. Say, how is that going to impact the goals and vision you have for the business? And that helps a lot to sort of frame up that conversation.
Excellent. So when we know what our ideal client is, how are we actually applying this information to, and I mean, obviously we've touched on this a little bit, but I mean, is there anything else? Are there any other kind of key things that you want to kind of bring up that talks about how we apply that information to what we're doing to actually improve our results in marketing and sales?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, this is really where the rubber meets the road, right? This initial exercise of figuring out your ideal client is valuable, but if you don't use that in every aspect of your business, quite honestly, but certainly in marketing and sales, then don't even start the journey. So a couple of things. I think one is if you can really understand how your buyers buy, then all of a sudden you're in alignment with that process and not creating friction. So that informs, how do you market, right? You're doing demand generation, lead generation, prospecting, whatever it is to create demand in your business. If you know that your typical buyer looks for stuff here, or researches certain keywords there, or is looking to solve this type of problem, then the biggest questions that I get when it comes to marketing is, what do I do, right? I mean, at the fundamental level, what do I say? How do I get it out? What do I do? Well, the buyer's journey helps answer those questions. So you can focus your resources, your money, your effort, and your energy to the things that are going to actually connect with your buying audience. So I think that sort of high level is really, really fundamental. I think the other is, if we understand the business problem that the buyer is trying to solve, and we can become an expert in their business, in their industry. It's not about being an expert in our industry. We have to be successful. But if we're perceived as an expert in their industry, then all of a sudden you're going to attract the right kind of buyer. And how do you do that? It's the content you produce. So we know we've got to put content out there now. So if you're writing blog posts, is it blog posts that are subtly or sometimes less subtly selling your services or your features? Or is it really about adding value to that marketplace? Maybe you're doing videos on LinkedIn and you're talking about the specific problem you know that your buyer's going through. That stuff's going to be found, and it's going to be found a lot more quickly because it's aligned with how your buyers buy. So I think fundamentally that's how the buyer's journey and your ICP align with all of your activities and tactics.
Interesting. So, a question popped up while I was kind of going back while you were talking about that brings us back into the kind of how to define it. What if you're somebody that can literally sell to anybody, right? Like, I mean, take my industry, for example, right? I sell a CRM. I can sell to anybody because everybody needs a CRM, right? And
Right.
of course, I've got, I've got my guardrails, right? I have the people that I won't work with personally just because it's not feasible, what have you. But for somebody like me, for an attorney, for because there are plenty of people out there that say, well, my ideal client is anybody that needs my services, right? Which, sure, okay, to an extent, but I mean, how do you really focus in when you have so many different people that you could be targeting, like with content, with things like that? How are you really dialing in? Or do you just kind of say, okay, this week is CPA week, next week is business attorney week,
Right.
etc.
So I think that's a really big question, right? So, and there's a lot of ways to sort of skin that cat, but there are the way I recommend clients approach this dilemma is, what are your most high value clients, right? How can you take everybody in the world? So in your case, anybody that markets or sells stuff or sends emails to a list needs Mission Suite, right? Mm-hmm. That's true. They may need it, but they may not realize they need it, or they may not be willing to spend the money to use it. They may not be willing to spend the time to implement it or maintain it. And so while everybody can use it, we need to define a little more tightly around the parameters that we just described. Somebody that's willing to spend the money, they have somebody that's a champion to use the tool, that's going to feed the machine with content, maintain the database, and you can quickly qualify in and out people that are willing to spend the extra money, right? Deploy the extra resources, because you can go buy the Ferrari. Right. If you don't have a driver and fuel, it's sitting in the docks, right? It's not going anywhere. So I think you take everybody and you start to boil it down. Then I would say the other is, while Mission Suites can certainly support sales forces of hundreds of people, then you're competing with a whole different set, right? You're dealing with the sales forces of the world. Do you want to compete with the sales force? Probably not, right? And maybe in some cases you're really competitive, but so you can think about competitive influences as you boil the ocean down even further. Where do you have the most competitive advantage, right? So let's say you've got 2 or 3 competitors that you bump up against all the time. Well, can you narrow your field, focus your field to where you're not competing against them as often, or your differentiation gives you a competitive advantage, right? And so if it's teams of 20 salespeople and above, you lose some competitive advantage, for example. But that 5 to 10, man, you've got it. So there's ways to continue to focus that ideal client profile down where you can be the most successful.
Right. Interesting. Excellent. So I want to change gears just a little bit here, and you kind of brought this up a little bit just a few minutes ago. Obviously, we've seen a lot of change over the past few months.
Yeah.
So can you kind of give us a sense of how sales and marketing have changed over the past 90 days?
Yeah. So it's been a bit of a roller coaster ride, right? For a lot of businesses. I think it depends on what you do, right? What is your business? What is your industry? Who do you serve? Mm-hmm. But I would say that there are very few buyers of business services that are buying would like to have stuff right now, right? They're just not. Even if their business is growing and they've found new opportunity, they're focused on feeding that and not the would like to have. And of course, on the other side of it, if companies are struggling, then they don't have budget, right? All of that extra spending has been cut. So I think the sort of like free flowing cash that we saw really over the last 7, 8, 9+ years has changed really, really quickly. So that may mean that your potential market has shrunk. So I think that's a big one. I was listening to a webcast earlier from a company called Forrester. I know you're familiar. So they're a kind of business to business market research company. And they've looked at buyers and what's changed in the last 90 days. And they've categorized buyers, or prospects, if you will, into 3 categories. So you can have your ideal client profile and all the things we've talked about. But to take it one step further, they've broken it into thriving buyers, surviving buyers, and struggling buyers. And so if you think about that as well, this is another thing that's changed. So thriving buyers are people that are actively feeding that machine. They've seen opportunity, they've seen growth in the last 90 days, and they're wanting to go. So their foot's on the gas. They're buying very quickly. And so you should be able to get a sense of that pace when you start to engage with those folks. So they're looking for information very quickly. They're responding faster than you've ever seen before. They're making decisions and spending. So obviously, if you've got your ideal client profile and they're a thriving buyer, that's like the best of both worlds right now. And so the next one was the surviving buyer. So the surviving buyer is a business that obviously has survived. They're sort of ticking along. They've maybe shrunk their spend, but they'll still engage with marketers and sellers, but they'll do it at a much slower pace. And so you need to sort of figure out, all right, is there a higher level need that they're trying to fulfill within their organization that our stuff supports? If there is, then they're probably a qualified prospect, but just know that they're going to move slowly. The alternative is they're just kind of kicking tires right now, and they're sort of thinking about 6, 8, 9 months down the road. So that surviving buyer is still a prospect. They're just going to close more slowly. You're going to probably have to nurture them longer with your marketing.
Right.
And then the final is the struggling buyers that are just budget's been cut. They're not doing anything. They're just trying to keep their head above.
Right. Right. Interesting. So how does a shrinking market like that impact that ideal client profile, or does it?
Yeah. So I think it does a couple of things. It makes you get more disciplined, I think, is really what it is. Number one, to make sure that you do focus on the opportunities in the markets that are going to generate business, number one. But it also gives you an opportunity to maybe take a step back and look at other ideal client profiles that you hadn't considered before. Like we said earlier, you can have more than one. So you maybe look at a tangent vertical or a slightly different way you deliver your services, which opens up new opportunity. So I think it causes us to be more creative and not just sort of do the same old thing over and over.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah. I mean, it's funny because, you and I got to know each other pretty in the middle of the Great Recession, right?
Right. Yeah,
And,
exactly.
and so it's interesting because, I mean, that was, and I remember hearing conversations time and time again about that very thing what does this do for us? Because even in the recession, even in the middle of a recession, people are spending money, right? You just have to find the ones that are.
Yeah, exactly. And what I sometimes find is that these business owners, especially if they've been around for a while, they'll just sort of almost put their head in the sand and say, we'll get through this.
Right.
And that's the opposite of what you need to be doing. You need to be opening up and looking at new opportunities, looking at partnerships. So that's the other thing. I think there are two things to think about. Also, what's changed is strategic partnerships is something that can open doors more quickly than any direct marketing can. And so there are opportunities to create these new relationships with synergistic suppliers, vendors, service providers. That's something I think is often overlooked. Sometimes they sort of come to us by accident. But I think about sort of selling through and with when it comes to strategic partners. Selling through is really like referral partners, right? You and I talk a lot about referral partners. Who's going to help refer you into their customers? You always need to have that at the forefront of your mind especially when you've got a shrinking market, because those people have customers that possibly may want to buy your stuff. Then the other is sell with. So sell through and then sell with. Sell with is a synergistic partner where you can perhaps bundle or align your services, and then it becomes 1 + 1 is 3 to the buyer. And you create an opportunity to sell to a larger marketplace or take on bigger projects than you otherwise could before. So there are lots of ways to sort of adapt and take advantage of this changing marketplace.
Yeah, interesting. So you're obviously talking to a lot of small businesses right now. What are some of the most common marketing mistakes that you're seeing business owners make right now that, you know, the rest of us can avoid?
Yeah, yeah, right. We want to avoid those. So I think, first of all, it's really not understanding your market, right? It goes right back to your ideal client profile and just sort of throwing stuff up against the wall and seeing what sticks. And that sort of trial and error approach, if you've got enough time and enough money and enough runway, okay, it's an expensive way to do it, but so that's a big mistake. Or we did one webinar
Right.
and it didn't work. Well, you try one of anything and usually it's not going to work. So having a plan, I think, is a big piece of that, right? So knowing that we've got to do this thing X number of times over X amount of time, over X period of time. And we know we may need to tweak our messaging and change our approach to really figure out what does work versus saying, well, that thing we tried, we did an email blast and nobody opened it. So that's a big mistake, is just trying stuff, right? Chasing the shiny object. Well, we've got to be on Pinterest, but you're a CPA firm. Well, Pinterest is a big thing.
Right.
Right. Well, yeah. Okay, maybe. So that kind of approach, just ad hoc trying stuff, is the biggest mistake. So obviously having a plan, right? Knowing what that plan is going to cost to implement, knowing how you can pivot, being focused on the buyer. I think that's the other piece, Ian, is you know, we can sit around a table and think about how cool we are and how we want to sell our stuff and how we want to talk about our stuff. But unless you really think about how the buyer buys and what they care about and the problems they want to solve, nothing we talk about matters. So that empathy, the empathetic approach is really important. And I think the other thing that really comes to mind right now during COVID and all the personal challenges that people are going through is, while the company that you're targeting may be doing well, the individual you're marketing or selling to may not be. They may be struggling. Health, family, maybe the company got downsized and now this person's doing 4 people's work. And we forget that, right? We come in, you know, guns a-blazing, if you will, just doing our thing, and we have got no idea where that buyer's at, that individual, that psychographic piece. And so I think right now that's probably more important than ever. So your messaging and your content has to add value and help that individual and help that prospective company as well. But I think those are some of the biggest things that I see that get messed up in good times and bad.
Right. Yeah, definitely. Excellent. Well, thank you. This has been great. And so before we wrap up, if anyone in our audience here, and obviously it's being recorded, and so it'll be out on YouTube, LinkedIn, on Facebook, all those things. Probably not Pinterest, but
Oh, come on.
Yeah, right. But if anyone in our audience here wants to get in contact with you to learn more, how can they reach you?
Yeah, you know, just Google my name, Dean Isaacs. I'm usually one of the top, results there, which hopefully I should be, right? You can find me on LinkedIn. If you Google Vantage Group Denver, you'll find me there. So I'm very available online.
Excellent. Very cool. And with that, to wrap up here, if you had one recommendation to leave our audience with to get better results from their marketing and sales, what would that recommendation be?
Do less, get more focused. Do fewer things, do them better.
Very nice. Excellent. Well, Dean, thank you so much for joining us today. It's been a really great conversation.
Absolutely. I appreciate it, Ian. Look forward to talking to you again soon, man.
Beautiful. And to everyone in the audience, thank you as well for joining us. We'll be sending the recording of this out, so keep an eye out for some follow-up emails here. And next month, I believe we'll be covering lead generation ideas and approaches. So be sure to keep an eye out for the announcement of our next session in our series as well. And with that, thank you so much, and we'll talk to you soon. Cheers.